Hey everyone, it's Simi Shah, and welcome to Trailblazers. Through this series, we bring you trailblazing by South Asians and for South Asians. We're the torchbearers, sharing the stories of the leaders and innovators lighting the way across the South Asian diaspora. Welcome everyone to Season 2, where we'll be welcoming all sorts of South Asian trailblazers who are burning bright. For our season opener, I'm so thrilled to welcome Rinki Sethi, the Chief Information Security Officer at none other than Twitter. Rinki's hiring at Twitter was a watershed moment. She joined the team in September 2020 after the platform suffered a security breach that compromised the accounts of several prominent figures, including now President Joe Biden and Elon Musk. Rinki previously served as the Chief Information Security Officer at cloud data management company Rubrik. And she also held senior cybersecurity roles at IBM, Palo Alto Networks, and Intuit. She began her career at the Pacific Gas and Electric Company, PG&E, Walmart, and also eBay. And in addition to her day job, she also serves as an advisor to several startups, including LevelOps, Authomize, and various cybersecurity organizations, including Women in Cybersecurity. Rinki is a trailblazer in the space, as a South Asian woman operating in a pretty heavily male-dominated arena. For that and many other reasons, I'm so excited to catch up with you today, Rinki.
I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, so I wanted to start in a direction that's a little bit meta, but something that I noticed that you tweeted the other day was about how you got your start in cybersecurity by finding a keylogger that your dad had used to spy on you. Is that really where it all began?
Yeah. So it was funny. I was probably 15, between the age of 14 and 16. And I remember either hearing a conversation between my parents where he was talking about something I had chatted to a friend about on AIM, AOL Instant Messenger. And I was like, I only talked about that online. How would he know about that? And so then I started looking on my computer to see if he had put some software on there. And sure enough, I found it. You know, at that point, it was called a parent spy tool of some sort. And it was literally a keylogger. It was capturing everything that I typed. And then he could see it on his machine. And so I found it and I uninstalled it. He would reinstall it. And then I would go back and uninstall it. And I was like, I don't want to have to check every single time. So I wrote a program that would alert me anytime it was installed. And I also let my sister know that he was doing that so that she could uninstall. And so I think I had that hacker mindset back then already, even though I didn't quite know what it was at that point. It was just playing cat and mouse with my dad.
Yeah, that's hilarious. I feel like kids would die for some code like that now with all the things that are out there to track them. That's awesome. So how did that translate to what you ended up studying in school and then your first role out of college at PG&E?
So I studied computer science engineering. That's not the degree I wanted to pursue. I actually wanted to become a lawyer. And my dad's like, well, lawyer, if that's a decision you're going to make, you should do that after your first degree. And so like typical Asian parents, he's like, go down the medical path or the engineering track. And I decided computer science engineering was my thing. And I already knew how to program. I was really good at math. So it seemed like a natural fit. And he said, if you don't choose one of those two career paths, then you need to stay at home and just go to a local university. And I did not want to do that. So I went and pursued my computer science engineering degree at UC Davis. I was a good programmer. And in my third year, I took a cryptography course. And this was when the economy had really taken a hit and there were not any jobs for college new grads at all. There were barely any companies recruiting, but my friend ended up getting recruited by PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric. And she was like, hey, they have a pizza night the night before they were going to interview. Why don't you just come with me and have some pizza at least? So I was like, college
free
kid,
food.
Pizza. Yeah, I'm going. I went with her. I ended up talking to one of the hiring managers that was at the event. And he asked me, what's your favorite class you're taking? And I said, by far, this cryptography course. And he said, cryptography, not programming. And I said, I like programming, but this was fascinating to me, just like the different ways you can encrypt data. And he said, I have a role in information protection. I'd love to interview you for it. And so the next day I interviewed.
Wow.
And that followed to more interviews and the rest is history. That was my entrance into cybersecurity. My first role was as a security analyst at PG&E.
Wow. That's amazing. And in that vein, So obviously you had this passion for cryptography that translated to data and encryption and information security. What is it about this topic and space broadly that excites you?
I found my passion much later. When I initially started in cybersecurity, it wasn't a carved out career path. There weren't that many resources that you could just go and easily find to study up on cybersecurity. Where I found my passion was at Walmart.com. One of my peers ended up becoming a really good mentor, taught me the ropes on everything to do with cybersecurity. I got my hands dirty as an engineer. And I had a project at the time to go and train developers. And this was one of the requirements because Walmart.com had fallen under PCI, the payment card industry audits.
Okay.
And one of the requirements was that you have to train your developers. And so I had to organize a training for the developers there. And I found like, because I had a development and computer science background, I was really able to relate to the developers and teach them about what could be done if they write bad code, how hackers can easily hack it. And I found that was my passion. It was really, how do you change the culture of a company to think about cybersecurity? And so that cybersecurity is in the DNA of a company. I kind of described that as cybersecurity culture change in a company. And that was like my niche. And that's what I really loved about cybersecurity. And that kind of opened doors then for future roles. And then from there, I kind of expanded all the things I've done in cybersecurity. But that's kind of what really grabbed me in.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I want to go back to some of your other roles at eBay and such, and Walmart included. But I think what's interesting there is I do feel like the tide around cybersecurity is changing. Every company today is a tech company, and it's a consideration you have to make. And I just think it's super fascinating that you're implementing that in conjunction with the sort of a management philosophy of it. This ties into the exact culture of a company and how it develops. And I imagine that that was a factor also in you joining Twitter. I know that Twitter had previously had a CISO, but that role had gone unfulfilled for some time. And then the big crypto securities scam happened in July, and then you were brought on in September. How did you feel stepping into the role, knowing that, and also just having this philosophy around cybersecurity and culture?
Yeah, it was an interesting time for me. Like just going, and I can talk about this later, but I was the CISO of Rubrik, as you mentioned before. COVID hit. I started started taking opportunities and recruiting calls. And Twitter reached out. And Twitter's obviously, if you're in the Bay Area, it's like a dream company to go and work for, right? But what really drew me in was they were at a very interesting time in making some calls that were really difficult calls for the company that really did put a target on their back. And that notion of being able to go and protect the public conversation really drew me in. And to be able to go to Twitter and really change the culture there, it wouldn't just change the culture, it makes the platform better for every single person that uses Twitter. And at the end of the day, it fulfills the goal of protecting the public conversation. And so it felt like a dream role, and it has been. Twitter's so relevant to everybody and everything in the world right now. And I get to be the one that kind of is that has the steering wheel on how we go and make sure that the culture internally is such that we're doing the best for our customer base.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting that you say a platform that touches everyone and everything in this world, because I was looking at the numbers and Twitter has something like 330 million monthly active users. And compared to some of the past companies you've worked at, I imagine it's a lot more consumer facing. What have been some of the things that have surprised you stepping into a CISO role within a company like this as compared to the roles and other companies that you've worked at?
I think it's not just because the number of consumers, but it's how the news affects. You never know what a day is going to look like at Twitter. And most companies you can anticipate, like I was at Intuit, and you can anticipate, okay, when the tax season's about to come, that's going to be a heavy period for the company. Or like when I was at eBay, it was Black Friday and certain times of the year that you see spikes. Whereas Twitter, you don't know. You can't predict what's going to happen tomorrow, and something might happen and Twitter becomes at the center of that. And so all of a sudden it's kind of like you can't always prevent, but you have to be very good at reaction. And then you have to be good at preventing things from happening when the news might shift. And so that part has been the most interesting to me, that every day is different. You don't know what to always expect, and when it will become kind of a target for cybersecurity because of what's in the news or what somebody might have tweeted.
Yeah. Do you have any anecdotes around that?
I mean, without going into detail, I mean, just kind of what was in the news. I mean, Twitter's taken some really hard stances on how we're going to flag or tag misinformation. And that does bring in then folks that are not happy with that. And then we see the other side of that from a cybersecurity perspective. And we have to make really difficult decisions, right, on things that don't have policy around it. So are we going to allow certain accounts on there or not? And if someone is conducting violence or other kinds of behaviors on there, how do we make that call, especially when that person, it might be a really like stand up public figure. And so there's all these things I think we got to think about. And then there's always cybersecurity implications on who might attack the platform as a result of a decision we've made. So I think hopefully that kind of describes like the past few months and what it's been like for Twitter.
Yeah. And I imagine that the recent suspension of Trump's account to some degree ties into all of this. Obviously, a growing conversation, not just with Twitter, but across other platforms, are how to manage misinformation and accounts from prominent figures who might be spreading hate speech or inciting violence. I'm just curious how that conversation around censorship and misinformation ties into your work within the cybersecurity realm at a place like Twitter on a day-to-day basis. What does that look like? What does that mean?
Yeah, my team is not responsible for the policies, but as I mentioned, the decisions that we make, and this is part of the reason I joined the company, is because I stand by the values and those decisions that the company has made. And they haven't been easy, but the decisions that they make always have implications for cybersecurity, right? Because no matter what we've done, there's always going to be an unhappy side. And that side can then come and say, we're going to attack the platform and we don't agree. And so we're going to try to take Twitter down. And so those are the aspects that my team has to worry about, is what guards do we need to have up now to prevent attacks, to prevent anything from happening to the company. And the breach was definitely an eye opener. And we've done a lot of things to improve the security at Twitter since then.
Yeah, I'd be curious to hear about some of those key tactical decisions. Again, speaking to your whole point on being passionate about that niche around cultural change and integrating this component of your work.
Yeah, I mean, there's several things we've done. One, we've really if you increase the number of factors you need to be able to do anything at Twitter. So your two-factor auth, we've made it even two-factor auth plus. We've implemented things like YubiKey. We've also focused a lot on making sure that our employees understand that every employee is a target. And this is the case not just at Twitter, but at almost any company that we've seen so many breaches in the news that usually the weakest link ends up being a mistake they've made or something, they've fallen victim to a phishing attack. And so similar things, just that the impact is much larger when something like that happens at Twitter. And so really kind of getting our people to be the first line of defense, understanding that if they feel that something doesn't look right, how do you report those things? How do we make sure that folks are regularly tested and understand what attackers might be doing? So putting a lot of those things in place have kind of increased just the paranoia within the company, healthy paranoia.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And healthy paranoia is an interesting way to phrase it. In 2016, there was this conversation that began around the hacking of the election through the creation of these fake robot accounts on Facebook and other platforms. Is that something that you have spent time thinking about, just given you joined in September right before the election?
Yeah, we have a pretty good function. We do have those challenges. We have a really good function to deal with those kind of things, and we continue to improve around it. But it's definitely a challenge, not just Twitter. Again, I think the industry faces, just kind of to my previous points, that folks that don't agree with some of the decisions, and then there's new accounts that are created through bots and so forth. And it's something we deal with every day.
Yeah. What do you anticipate will be other challenges that the industry broadly, or just companies broadly, are going to face from an information security perspective going forward?
There's going to be many. I think one is what I just said, protecting the public conversation, I think is like in the front and center. We're going to continue to hear about policies and open source ways to go and fix that challenge on how do we do that? Who holds the power in making decisions? So I think that will be one. And then how do we as cybersecurity professionals continue to make sure that we can prevent attacks when there's so much unknown in that area? That will be one. The other is the remote workforce. I think COVID has definitely transform the way that people work, and companies you're not on the company network to do your work anymore. And so you lose visibility from a security perspective. So I think we're going to see new products emerge in the security market. We're going to see that continued focus on protecting the work from home environment. And then what you teach your employees has to change as well, because now when you print a document, where are you going to go and shred it? There's no more shredders that you have at work or confidential storage places. So there's a lot to think about, not just on the InfoSec side, but just more general security and just good hygiene when it comes to cybersecurity. The other is there's transformation around cloud. And so I think more and more companies are going to cloud because it was hard. How do you maintain your data centers when you can't have people going there? In cloud was already a transformation that had started, but cloud security is going to, I think, just be super important. We continue to hear about breaches that happen because cloud security is companies transform so quickly to the cloud, and security is very often an afterthought. So I think that will be another area that will continue growing.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how much the pandemic has, I think some people would say exacerbated. I like to think of it as accelerated issues that we were probably going to face regardless. And I think it's good because it's forcing us to have the conversation, albeit not necessarily with the preparedness we would have hoped for. What do you think is something about cybersecurity that like the average American should know to protect themselves online or to protect their information?
I think it was interesting. We just had a speaker at work come and talk about what are a few tips that individuals at home can practice. Like, I think one is she had very interesting advice around understand your own threat profile. The same advice around cybersecurity doesn't apply to everybody. Like, one of the things that she had mentioned was, you keep hearing that you shouldn't write your passwords on a piece of paper or in a notebook. But that might be right for an elderly person who does that and maybe locks away the notebook because they can't remember their passwords. So that advice may not be like the right advice for every single person. But I think the biggest one was social engineers are becoming really, really savvy, whether it goes through the phone or whether it's through a phishing email or it's somebody calling you saying that I'm the IRS. And so I think knowing and understanding, like, it's always okay to ask for more information without first providing any information. Being skeptical is okay. Like, if there is something important that's being asked of you and it seems like this is not the right forum to do that, like, your instincts and gut are probably right, and follow that, and don't just provide your personal information to somebody just kind of off the cuff. Don't feel like in the moment that you have to do that. There's a lot of scare tactics that social engineers use. That's like the top advice I would give.
Yeah. No, that's super interesting. I have a friend who was in the process of being naturalized as a citizen. And so she was just on edge because she wanted the process to go well. And she got a call from someone asking for her social security number and just gave it in the context of this process. And I was like, you can't, that sounds like a red flag right there. That's super interesting. Does this translate to your home? Like, are you very on top of password management and just like your network and things like that?
Yeah, we have our networks protected. We have a VPN for at home. We have password tools. I also monitor what our kids' activity, we have tools at home that we can manage what websites they can go to and all of that. We use the native, also Apple parental controls on the kids' devices. In fact,
very full circle.
Yeah. So exactly. Well, I do have some new rules on privacy that I do. Although I don't know, my daughter's not a teenager yet, but maybe I will do that once she.
And then maybe she'll write a code and it'll really be full circle.
Yeah, it might actually become like that, and she might be better at it than me.
That's awesome. I want to take a little bit of a step back to something that I mentioned in the introduction. And I was reading about how 9 in 10 CISOs tend to be male, which is a pretty crazy statistic. But this is obviously and has tended to be traditionally a very male-dominated space. What has been your experience being a South Asian woman in an executive role in this arena?
If you asked me when I was at PG&E and even Walmart and eBay, I thought that being an individual contributor was I thought I had made it and that was going to be it for me for the rest of my career. And so I never thought I would be in a management role in security because you didn't see people like me in management roles. You barely saw women in manager roles. I started seeing more women in management roles when I was at eBay, which gave me hope that, okay, there is more beyond this. And I started getting involved in some women's groups around security, and there would be one CISO that would be there. So it was okay, there's hope for women in this field, but South Asian women, I was one of the few at the time. I maybe even one of 2 or 3 that was in cybersecurity that I knew. And I honestly thought that was a glass ceiling. And it's changed now over time. Obviously, I've grown in roles. I found other people that were out there. There are women out there. There's such a small number still, but there are women out there. There are a lot of South Asian women that are CISOs and I've met some of them and they're amazing. I never could have imagined that's how it was going to be. I was, and I still am in meetings that are completely men. And so that was definitely the case at the beginning of my career. And it's changed I think now I see much more diverse teams and it's changed and I'm excited. And when I look back, I'm like, I could have never imagined that this was going to be the case. You start believing what you see, and it is what you see. Was not that much diversity. It's kind of what I believed. And it was one of the things that I was like, it was an area of passion for me too, that how do we bring more diversity into this field? Because it can't continue like this.
Absolutely. And I know that you've done some work around that, being an advisor for some of these startups, as well as women in cybersecurity. And you were also implementing a program around diversity and encouraging women in STEM with the Girl Scouts. Can you speak a little bit to those experiences and programs that you've been working on?
Yeah. So there have been women that have helped me in my career and uplifted me. And I think just when I got connected to women's groups, I was like, I didn't even know these people existed. And we also need to bring more women into cybersecurity. So one of my proudest moments, and it still gives me goosebumps talking about it, like even when you mentioned it, but it was the partnership with the Girl Scouts at Palo Alto Networks. It was, how do you get more girls to think about technology and think about cybersecurity? And what better than a partnership with the Girl Scouts at the time, where we partnered with them, not just to introduce, but we actually built the curriculum for the first set of national cybersecurity badges for kindergarten through 12th grade. And now that curriculum was available in every single zip code in the US. And thinking about that, these girls may not just enter cybersecurity as a career path, but in the meantime, they're going to also help their communities, the elderly, their parents, their siblings, to learn about cybersecurity along the way and make just our communities stronger and more safer and secure. So I think that to me is one way to, make a big impact. And I continue to be very passionate about that. I'm proud of having teams that have been 50-50 women and men. I think that's how you recruit, how you think about that. It only makes your team stronger, but it continues to be a passion of mine big time, not just about how do we bring more women and diversity into the field, but also how do we teach kids this very early on?
Yeah, it's a great passion to have. And I think the question you just asked about how we should teach kids early on is something that we need to be asking ourselves across a variety of fields, because the world is becoming faster, the pace of technology is accelerating, and we want to be able to help these kids understand how to engage with and solve these problems early on, especially taking the lens of diversity and encouraging people that traditionally wouldn't have entered these fields. Within that realm, having spent some time with youth in this space, if you were to reflect, what is something that you had wished you had known early on in your career?
I think I did programming. My dad he taught programming classes. So I was introduced to that a lot, but I never maybe I didn't have the drive, or I wasn't encouraged to build something that was productive back then. Now you look at kind of what's available to kids. They can enter contests to go and build an app to do something good. There's kids that have done amazing things during the pandemic to just build things that are useful for people. And I think that wasn't there. And I wish I had learned that side of it, whether it was for business or it was for nonprofit. And I think it goes back to one of the things that I was really, as one of the few women in the industry back then, I was really scared to make mistakes. I felt like I had to work 10 times harder than anyone else around me. And I can't make mistakes, and I have to be perfect, and I have to deliver something that's just perfect the first time. And because that was so ingrained in my head, it took me a long time in my career to take risks. And so I think that's that risk-taking notion on go take on a new project. It's okay to make mistakes, and finding that team that's supportive of that. And I think that's how you innovate and do new things. So I think those two things kind of go hand in hand, and just being able to build for something productive and taking risks at the same time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's something that I definitely try to bear in mind, just being early career myself. And I personally took a big risk. I was in the financial industry, also very similarly, very male dominated, and then decided to leave to pursue my passion for media. And here we are. But I think it's super interesting because I think also just being the children of immigrants have a natural risk aversion to some degree, and have tried to find the balance there and become more okay with taking some of those risks, because I can right now, or at least I feel like I should be able to. That's super interesting. Something I'm curious about, obviously, I know you have worked across all these different organizations that all in all represent very different platforms or products. Can you speak a little bit to each of those experiences and kind of your key takeaways at the different companies that you worked for?
Yeah, it has been so different. So, I mean, PG&E was like, I remember when I started there, I was war dialing. I had literally these clickers in my cube where I was trying to find all the modems in the company and see if like we could authenticate to them if they had usernames and passwords. And we had conversations on like Skype was not approved software. And if someone installs Skype, should we just go and unplug their computer? I mean, that's the type of conversation we were having back then. And that's a long time ago too. So, but that's kind of how PG&E was. And then I moved from there to Walmart.com where I was one of two security people. And when you think about Walmart.com back then, you were talking about like not even $1 million in revenue on their platform a year, right? So it was like very small e-commerce site that they had acquired, making it Walmart.com. And we had to build security from scratch there. I remember there, I would be calling, there were sites that would try to imitate Walmart.com, and I would call ISPs to take those sites down. We would do all the vulnerability scanning for the site, pen testing, firewall approval changes.
Sounds very manual.
Very manual. And it was, I mentioned this earlier, like you saw spikes in the stressful time was during Black Friday and those big shopping events, right? And so it was like you circled your security time and prevention around that. And then I went to eBay, which was at that point, then it was retail, but it was like well established. They were one of the first early internet companies. And we got to see some of the craziest attacks on our platform. It was one of the first retail sites that saw the type of spear phishing attacks. And that's when like how important security culture change and like just how you go and embed security into the DNA of the company so that employees cared about it was more important than ever. And as an online e-commerce platform that integrated then with one of the newer financial platforms, PayPal, there were a lot of interesting fraud like techniques that hackers would use as well. So very interesting and different type of place completely. It was also very progressive, like a fun culture. So how you did security, you had a way of doing more innovation. They were early in thinking about cloud and what that might look like. And then I went from there to Intuit. Intuit was interesting. I entered there when they were literally like, remember you used to walk into Costco and you'd buy TurboTax and you'd buy it, right? And you'd install it on your computer. And they were walking away from packaged desktop software to not just cloud, but moving TurboTax to AWS. And then how you like you have a company with thousands of developers that have been developing desktop software, and it's not the same thing to leverage resources in the cloud and develop there. And so you have to rethink everything and rethink cybersecurity. And I was there during that transformation to help them think about how do you do product security in a whole new world. And when you think about that, you literally have to like overnight learn about cloud, learn about AWS, learn about the security challenges, and then hire a team around that. And so very interesting time into it. And then it felt like for me, it was complete shift, not just in terms of companies, but also in terms of role with Palo Alto Networks. Palo Alto Networks is a cybersecurity company. They sell to other, it wasn't a consumer company. They sell to other businesses and other enterprises. And so it's B2B. And it was one of my favorite roles up to that point was working there because I got to build the heart and center of what Palo Alto Networks actually delivered to their consumers. So I built a security operations function, and Palo Alto Networks, they sell products to other security operations teams. And so we became kind of like that first customer to Palo Alto Networks. And I got to build that team. I got to be that woman in high heels that ran around solving incidents and doing incident response, dealing with threat management, building a team of hackers, our red team, and really build a world-class operations that other customers could see. We did like every CISO, I think, in the top 100 companies I met because they walked through our SOC to see it and see how we built operations. So it was an amazing adventure there. They also, what I loved was we got to use the platform to do good, to build out programs with the Girl Scouts because we were a cybersecurity company. So just a complete different kind of thing. And then I went to Rubrik, which was my first startup company. Actually, there was a little bit of a gap where I made a career mistake. I went to IBM. I went there to go lead enterprise security. IBM is a beast of a company. It's huge. It's in healthcare. It's in every industry you can think about.
Yep.
But I went to go lead enterprise security there. They really leaned on their managed services to run security internally. So I went there to go build that. IBM was not the right fit for me. I think just the pace of movement, given that the company was so large, it was incredible that you get to learn to build at scale with 400,000 endpoints and so forth. But things move slow too when it's that large. So in the meantime, Rubrik came up, startup culture, building from scratch. I entered Rubrik behind a breach to help them clean that up and then build up a robust security program. And then Twitter, we talked about completely different.
Yeah.
And, going from so then enterprise software again to moving back into consumer space and leading security for that. So yeah, it's been changes in company and culture and changes in role as well, just leading different roles in different companies.
Yeah. No, it's super fascinating because as you were talking, it almost sounds like in many ways your career scaled along the same life cycle as a lot of these companies. I mean, to hear you talk about Walmart being at that size and even eBay when PayPal was a new novel thing is pretty crazy. I want to go back to something that you touched on about not finding the fit and feeling a little bit like IBM was your career mistake. Obviously, this podcast is directed towards young South Asians. How did you think about kind of making your transition from that and recovering from that so-called mistake in the context of your broader career?
Yeah, I was devastated. I'll tell you what, I thought I would at least stay there for a year because I wanted to make it to that 1 year mark. And
Yep.
I was feeling like I've never had that kind of gap. In the Bay Area, it's very normal, right? To be at a company about 3 years, 2 to 3 years, and then make a switch. But leaving a company before a year, I didn't feel good about that. But I also in that 6 months, there were a lot of things that I was just not happy. I was moving so slow and I like to stay busy at work. A lot of work actually defines who I am as a person. And so it was tough for me and I kind of spiraled a little bit downwards. And then when Rubrik came up and it was through a referral of a mentor of mine and he said, you should go, the good buddy of mine runs this company and you should go and look at this. I've told them they should hire you. And I was like, yeah, I don't know that I want to leave IBM before a year. And he really talked to me about it's okay to do that. It's okay. You haven't made a career mistake like that. And it's okay to go and you learn, and if you're going to be happier here, the growth is going to be different. It's the right fit for you. Go and make the change. And so I did it. And as soon as I started there, I was so glad I went and joined that company and it was the perfect fit for me at the time. And so I think career mistakes are good. You learn from them and you learn. For me, it's I thought I wanted this big scale and building something super large. And at the end of the day, I think it was more no, I need fast pace. I need to be able to make impact quickly and be able to move forward from there. Yeah. And so it made me learn that. And so I'm not ever going to go back to a place like that. That is not the right fit for me. So, and I recovered and then I was at Rubrik and it landed me at Twitter. So, I mean, it's been an amazing ride.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to tell you how much that resonates with me. And obviously, very, very different stage of my career. But like I said, I was very much trying to hit that year mark within finance. And I was very miserable. It was just so obvious to me that it was not what I wanted to do. And I existed within this larger organization, a lot of structure, not a lot of creative energy. And then got to jump to a startup, very fast paced, a lot of opportunity to ideate. And it transformed my entire life because I think similarly, I'm going to be the kind of person where work is a very large part of my identity. So it's nice to hear that someone like you has done that and kind of lended itself to you figuring out what you really wanted to do over the longer term.
No, yeah, it happens to all of us. And the quicker you make that choice, I think it's better because you don't want to be miserable for a long time.
Agreed. So now that you've landed yourself at Twitter, I know we've spoken a little bit about some of the projects that you've been working on coming out of what they're focused on. What are you most excited about in terms of projects and things that you're working on and will get to work on?
Yeah, there's a lot I'm excited about. So one, it's just that notion of protecting. How do we continue to protect the public conversation? I'm super excited about the team that's there and how do we scale, uplift, and really build out the organization in the next few years. I think Twitter has a very unique environment. They're so advanced in so many ways. They're going into these new market spaces. And so continue to secure that as in the news, we've made acquisitions, I think 3 or 4 acquisitions since I joined over the last few months. How do we continue to make sure those acquisitions are secured? And then I think just solving the same challenges that other companies have around security culture and how do we really make a robust culture? How do we engage more with our security research communities? So excited about a lot here. I'm very new here. And so still looking forward to learning and just kind of building out a robust security team here.
Well, I'm sure it's very exciting to get to engage with those questions and to have the opportunity to watch this part of the organization grow. I'm curious if you've seen or faced any challenges along the way already, specifically relevant to the fact that you're working at a social media platform in a different role.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge, it's what we talked about earlier, is you create a strategy, then you have plans, and then you want to go and execute on those plans. And in usual state, you just go and you move forward. But then like when you're dealing with unexpected things that happen, that kind of can throw you off. And so I think getting used to that chaos and like just those are the biggest challenges, is that sometimes you don't know what to expect and it might throw you off the plans. And how do you develop a program such that it can like absorb some of those incidents and just what might be unexpected? I think that's the biggest thing. And that's been the mindset shift that, okay, I got to be good with like the day just not going the way I expected to, and that our plans being shifted. So that's been kind of the biggest thing for me.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. We've obviously spent some time talking about your transition across varied sorts of companies, but I actually want to talk a little bit about your transition through the roles you've held. So when you started out in the space, you were working in the weeds, the product engineering side, which makes a lot of sense. And then you started to incorporate this managerial component as you rose up the ladder, which makes sense in most pathways for many careers. But CISO as an executive role is still pretty new to the C-suite. A lot of companies still don't have it and probably won't for some time. I'm curious when you had that inflection point or turning point in your career where you realized that being a member of the C-suite was something that you could aspire to. Is that something that you always had in your mind's eye or developed over time?
I think I never thought that I would be a CISO, or if I did, I think it was probably, oh, that's going to be like when I'm a lot older. That's what I think was in my head when I go back to that. I can't remember that there being a moment saying like, yes, you know what, I'm going to go. What I do remember is when I was at eBay, I went on maternity leave with my second child. I came back and I was like, I don't want to do management for a while. I think I need to step out of it. Having 2 kids at home, plus having a large global team, it's too much for me. But the CISO thing sounds interesting. Like, I wonder if I could find a role like that. And so I went into it. What I went to Intuit to do was be an individual contributor, leading security strategy for 2 of their business units, both of which they divested since. But I went there to do that. And I was like, I actually can do this, like building, and it was called an information security officer role,
Wow.
But it was as an individual contributor. And I was like building strategy, getting teams to execute on that strategy. I can do that. And fast forward a few months, they asked me to take on product security and then transform that team. The interesting thing about Intuit was it really stretched me as a leader. They focused so much on leadership traits, leadership qualities that really stretch you to kind of be a very solid leader. I think at that point, I understood what leadership was all about. And I was like, I do want to go down this executive path. And then when I think I was at Palo Networks, that's when I was like, I could see myself being a CISO. And I kind of felt like I was operating almost in most ways in that way. So it kind of just naturally happened. But I don't think at any point in time, it was like, I'm going to go down. Even when I came and took the CISO role at Twitter, I was like, okay, I'm going to be the CISO of Twitter. Like how the market responded to that. I never anticipated that. I was just taking on another security leader role.
Can you speak a little bit to that? What surprised you about that?
To me, it was just me. And it's like me taking on another security leadership role. It was like, and yes, Twitter's super cool and I was excited about it, but it just blew up. I remember like there's people I haven't talked to in 20 years that were reaching out and things like that. It was overwhelming and I just didn't anticipate that. And I'm like, folks were calling and saying, we're so proud of you and we're so excited. And I'm like, but it's just me.
It just felt like another role.
Yeah. I was like, where was this fanfare when I took on the CISO role at, like that to me was a big deal, taking on the CISO role at Rubrik, because that was my first time CISO gig. And it was kind of like a little bit uneventful. And this was very eventful. So it was really interesting. Like the transitions that happen are really interesting, right?
Yeah, no, that's super fascinating. And I don't know, to some degree, I've found that is a component of just being a super consumer facing business, I imagine, especially after such a major event. But that's really exciting. And I'm glad that you did get the fanfare because it's part of the reason I heard about you and got very excited to bring you on the podcast. what advice would you give to aspiring South Asians who are interested in pursuing CISO type leadership in the future?
Yeah, I would say security field is so huge. There's so much you can be passionate about. Don't get turned off if there's an area of security that you're not passionate about. Continue exploring new things within it. Take big risks. I think that's how you really move forward as being an innovative CISO or an innovative security leader, is when you do something that's uncharted that others have not done in security, and it's successful or it doesn't go well. And then you can talk about those stories. That's what we have, are the battle scars.
Yeah.
And so I would say those, like, go and innovate, take big risks, do things that are new, like go and innovate with vendors out there or whatever it is to go do something new that hasn't been charted before. And I think that's what makes a good CISO. And that's kind of like how to get into that position, is when you have tried and taken big risks.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. And I honestly think it's advice that can be applicable across a lot of fields for anyone trying to pursue C-suite leadership. Are there any really manifest ways in which your South Asian identity has impacted you over the course of your career? Just memories or anecdotes that really stick with you?
I think, like, I don't know about anecdotes. You know what was interesting is, so when I was at PG&E, I didn't really think about me as being South Asian or the culture or anything like that. What was really cool was when I went to Walmart.com, there were a lot of other Indian people there, and they celebrated Diwali. And I remember people would dress up in saris and like come all festive. And I kind of didn't want to, because I was like, I don't know, like, it's weird to do that at work. And later, I actually got excited about things like that, like the fact that you can bring your whole authentic self to work, it makes you unique. And I think like that was a really cool part of it. And so since then, it's been different for me. Like, I really take pride in who I am as a whole, and like some of the culture and like that South Asian attributes that we grew up with. And so I think that's super important now.
That makes a ton of sense. And I imagine is really exciting. And it's also been exciting to see that grow over time, I'm sure, over the last several years. I feel like a lot of companies are adopting ERGs and other just holiday celebrations and things like that that really allow you to bring your whole self to work. Something I'm definitely excited about.
Yeah, me too. And it's not just kind of like cultural ERGs or like Indian ERGs and that kind of thing, but companies have grown a long way since I started working. I know, like, the ability to talk about mental health at work and to be able to talk about a lot of these things that were kind of taboo back then. It's been amazing to see that transformation.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Rinki. This has been an amazing conversation just to learn about your life story and kind of your management philosophy and everything under the sun. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, same here. Thanks for having me on your show.
This is a podcast from Trailblazers Media. For more content on South Asian trailblazing, follow us at South Asian Trailblazers on Instagram and Facebook.